Hello horror fans, and welcome to my first expedition into the realm of 31 Days of Horror, one horror film I've never seen before for each day of the month of October. I'll quickly delve into each film, highlighting the best and the worst parts, along with giving each film a star rating and a list of the top 5 movies and the worst 5 movies of the month. So let's begin. Tales of Halloween, a horror anthology spanning 10 different stories that all take place on Halloween. Despite possessing the collaborative directorial talent of Darren Lynn Bousman, Andrew Cash, and Neil Marshall to name a few, Tales of Halloween is a mixed bag of quality stories and forgettable tales, some of which have premises that don't necessarily need to take place on Halloween, making one wonder why they were included at all. Practical effects and decent acting make some of the short films an enjoyable watch, while others feel outright mean-spirited when you start seeing kids get run over on Halloween night and getting shot in the street. Best parts of the movie are the use of practical effects and Halloween atmosphere. Worst parts are the inconsistent quality of the stories and subpar acting from some of the cast. 2 out of 5. Stir of Echoes. The ghost of a teenage girl haunts Kevin Bacon's family in this thriller based off the book by horror author Richard Matheson. Following in the same vein as The Changeling, Stir of Echoes' central terror focuses on a ghost who will not rest until their death is avenged by the truth, thus making it familiar treaded ground, but still holds your attention thanks to the performances by Kevin Bacon, Ileana Douglas, and Kevin Dunn. It's not a film that will have any new surprises for a current generation, but is still a good attempt for its late 90s era. Best parts of the movie are Kevin Bacon's descent into madness and eerie movie theater sequences. Worst parts are the predictable storyline and clunky finale. 3 out of 5. Scary Movie 5. The 5th installment in the highly successful horror parody film series that peaked with Scary Movie 3 and just didn't know when to die. I knew exactly what I was getting into with this movie, but the completionist in me decided to bite the bullet anyway. Overall, it was a sad reminder of how the first 3 movies came out at the perfect time, cashing in on the most popular horror and sci-fi, while also possessing the talents of the Wayans brothers, and eventually the creators of Airplane and Naked Gun. But for 2013, and even now, the jokes come off as poorly written sketch comedy with no consistent transition from one joke to the next, and a necessary story to tie them all together is almost non-existent. The opening bedroom scene between Charlie Sheen and Lindsay Lohan was one of the most turn-back-now moments I've ever felt when starting a movie. Best parts of the movie are the performances by Molly Shannon, Snoop Dogg, and Lydia Porto. Worst parts are the lazy jokes, shallow story, and the unnecessary inclusion of Ashley Tisdale as a lead actor. 1 out of 5. Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. A documentary focusing on the life and career of Mark Patton, who starred as the first male Scream Queen in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and the struggles he had to face when the film and his performance were considered homoerotic during an unacceptable social era. As someone who considers Nightmare 2 to be one of the better sequels in the franchise, I was very excited to finally see this documentary that shed light on Mark Patton's brief career and eventual embrace of the new appreciation his performance and the film has received. It's both enlightening and saddening as the film expertly weaves the 3 factors of Patton's life, the struggling gay culture of the 80s, and the Nightmare film itself. Best parts of the movie are the story, the inclusion of almost all the cast and crew of Nightmare 2, and the confrontation between Patton, the writer, and director he believed responsible for harming his career. Worst parts are the inconsistent narration. 4 out of 5. Lake Mungo. A mockumentary about the tragedy of how... Wait. There's gotta be a better word than mockumentary. A pseudo-documentary about an Australian family who lost their daughter in a drowning accident, but start seeing images of her caught on tape. Although it is one of the better fake horror documentaries I've seen, with its decision of allowing the story and characters to convey the sense of unease and fear instead of outright scary moments, it both benefits and is hampered by its simplicity. Since the family is speaking about the tragedy after the mystery has been solved, they come off as very complacent and polite, which feels very natural but doesn't achieve a greatly dramatic tone. Their daughter, Alice, doesn't possess a whole lot of backstory or anecdotes to help the audience connect with the family's sense of loss either, but that also makes you care more for the relationship between her surviving family and friends. Best parts of the movie are the sense of realism, use of pixelated footage to make you really pay attention to what you're seeing, and the chilling conclusion. Worst parts are the lack of characterization for Alice and the sometimes too calm nature of the main characters for the illustration of their grief. 3 out of 5. Street trash. Joe Bob Briggs said it best when he described this movie as a film that truly makes you want to take a shower after watching. Street Trash is a filth-ridden 80s indie movie about the homeless of New York and the terror they face from renegade cops, a Vietnam vet kingpin, and a deadly undiscovered alcohol that turns anyone who drinks it into melted gas station slushy. So many things in this movie do in fact make you want to take a shower after seeing it. From melting bodies, to necrophilia, to male body part dismemberment, and so much worse. It's not hard to see why this became a cult classic. The actors still give dedicated performances, and the bloody effects are a lot of fun to watch. Best parts of the movie are the practical effects, inane dialogue, and hilarious side story involving a mob boss and his restaurant doorman. Worst parts are the very uncomfortable scenes of junkyard gang rape and necrophilia. 3 out of 5. Satanic Panic. A down-on-her-luck pizza delivery woman finds herself at the mercy of a group of rich, middle-aged Satan worshippers who want to use her for their virgin sacrifice to birth a demon god. Though the concept definitely has exploitation merit, it doesn't fully hit its mark by the end of the movie. When the dialogue isn't weighed down by its attempts at awkward given the horrifying situation comedy, it's torn apart by the character of Judy, whose edgy and vulgar alliteration sounds like she's trying to rip off a Diablo Cody script.
And they're not going to stop until you're strapped naked to a barbed wire altar with a 15-foot beast of Gehenna and his double-pronged demon dong walking out of your coot chute like it's a revolving door of ground beef.
Key points in the story aren't always fleshed out, and the ending offers the audience a sense of resolution that doesn't feel genuine or earned given every horrifying thing that has happened to our innocent main character. If the main character was a budding high school graduate instead of a mid-20-year-old, and if the film had been made in the 1980s specifically during the Satanic Panic scare, and was double billed with a movie like Society, it definitely could have found a stronger audience response. Best parts of the movie are the practical effects and the hilarious performance by Arden Mirren.
I know that, Gary. I could tell time. The worst part, Gary, I saw this coming. I saw this years ago. Answer your fucking phone!
Worst parts are the uninteresting dialogue, inconsistent tone, and the haphazard ending. 2 out of 5. Scare Me. Two horror writers, one who's successful and confident, the other who's aspiring and desperate, find themselves caught in a blackout with nothing to do, so they decide to spend the night in a cabin telling each other scary stories. Very much like a stage play, this film is set in one location with a very small cast and relies on hilarious dialogue, patient pacing, and encompassing sound effects to tell its humorous and emotionally resonating story. This is a must-see for anyone who questions their own creative integrity or needs that spark of inspiration to keep them creating, while also serving as an incredibly creepy watch all on its own. There are many small-budgeted movies that are relegated to one location with a small cast and a strong premise, but fall on their face when it comes to keeping you engaged and having a strong finish. Luckily, Scare Me does what those other films cannot. Best parts of the movie are the performances, sound design, and concept. Worst parts aren't really present save for a couple of lulls in the pacing. 5 out of 5. Cube. A group of random strangers find themselves trapped in a Rubik's Cube of terror as they must struggle to escape room after deadly room and uncover the mystery as to why they are there. A definite must-see for anyone who appreciates the claustrophobic paranoia of Saw, the movie is a shining example of doing the best with what you have with a small budget and one studio. The tension is a suspenseful cocktail of hidden character motivations, dangerous traps at every turn, and an overall atmosphere of headache-inducing nihilism as you feel just as exhausted as the characters struggling to decipher the monolithic cube. Best parts of the movie are the production design, camera work, and unconventional soundtrack. Worst parts are the subpar dialogue, confusing character decisions, and an ending that I personally hoped would turn out differently. 4 out of 5. Reincarnation. A Japanese actress lands her first role in a horror film that aims to recreate a tragic massacre that occurred in a hotel. but her involvement begins to unravel a terrifying revelation that is linked to her belief in reincarnation. A belief that seemed to be the only concept the film had going for it, as the story constantly reminds you about it and the implications for its main character. The terror comes from the actress realizing that she may be the reincarnation of a little girl who was murdered in the hotel, but the story milks the idea dry and only really pays off when we finally reach an engaging climax. What could have been a J-horror classic immersed in a dark foreshadowing atmosphere feels like a bare-bones story that goes on for too long. Best parts of the movie are its stop-motion sequences that should have been used a lot more, and a climax that actually feels like a full-circle ending for the story. Worst parts are the tiresome pacing, repetitive plot points, and bland locations. 2.5 out of 5. Contamination. One of the many Italian rip-offs of popular American horror movies of the 80s, Contamination follows a conspiracy where green exploding eggs from Mars are being smuggled into New York from an unknown source, and it's up to a former astronaut, an everyman cop, and a lead government scientist to stop the invasion. Supposedly Italy's attempt at ripping off Alien but having it take place on Earth, Contamination is more so a mixed bag of a lazily written sci-fi movie made actually watchable due to its comically cheesy dialogue and over-the-top practical effects, making this one of the more entertaining Italian ripoffs, like something I'd catch at 6 in the morning during the golden age of the Sci-Fi Channel. Best parts of the movie are the gruesome body horror effects, the creepy breathing of the alien eggs, and the embarrassing dialogue. Worst parts are the confusing character decisions, bad melodrama, and a subpar finale. 3 out of 5. Urban legend. A group of college kids are terrorized by a slasher who mostly kills their victims under the guise of urban legend folklore, such as hearing screeching sounds on the roof of your car, or not flashing your headlights at a car that doesn't have theirs on because they'll chase you off the road, which is an urban legend that I have never heard of in my life. The concept quickly falls flat as you question why the story, much like Satanic Panic, is centered on young adults instead of teenagers who would be more convinced and threatened by the idea of an urban legend killer. Phoned-in performances don't help the movie either, as actors like Joshua Jackson and Tara Reid make you feel like you're watching their lazy attempt at recreating the tongue-in-cheek success of Scream. Whereas side characters, played by horror veterans Robert Englund and Brad Dourif, are small highlights of the movie, leading to one of my favorite lines of dialogue of all time. Someone's in the back seat! Best parts of the movie are the opening scene and Rebecca Gayhart's performance during a part of the film that I won't spoil. Worst parts are the concept, Tara Reid's performance, and poor attempt at sequel baiting. 2 out of 5. The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Based off the real Texarkana murders from 1946, the film takes a docudrama approach at telling the terrifying story of how one man killed 5 people and got away with it. The film has a very bare-bones approach to its horror. An unknown man stalks innocent people, most of them teenagers, and kills them under the cover of darkness with no known motive. It possesses the simplicity and small-town terror that would later be seen in Halloween, but it unfortunately lacks the pacing, characters, and soundtrack to amplify the concept. The film takes no time to flesh out the police officers that we should be rooting for to catch the killer, and the soundtrack continuously erases the sense of realistic danger by scoring the film with banjos and harmonicas, thus turning the based-off true events drama into what felt like an episode of The Dukes of Hazzard. If placed in the hands of David Fincher, this story would have the potential of truly resonating with an audience. Best parts of the movie are the killer's costume and the title of the film. Worst parts are the slow pacing, inappropriate attempts at comedy, and the awkward soundtrack. 1.5 out of 5. Blood Harvest. A young woman named Jill returns home from college only to find that her parents are missing, and that she's being stalked by a murderous prowler. Much like Street Trash, this film also made me want to take a shower, not because of over-the-top gore or body dismemberment, but because of how utterly uncomfortable I felt watching our main character get continuously groped, chloroformed, and molested by both the unknown killer and her local ex. Jill is an oblivious character who is always in imminent danger and can can do almost nothing about it. Not so much out of weakness, but because the script has nothing for her to do, other than sit and wait for her parents to never show up, or call the police only for them to never take her seriously. Sure, it's exploitation horror, but you have to give the main character some kind of way to at least fight back. Best parts of the movie are Tiny Tim's creepy performance, and probably the best phone call in cinema history.
Fuck you, bitch.
Worst parts are the uninteresting characters, overly long murder scenes, and Jill's inability to have any kind of character motivation. 1 out of 5. The Exorcist 3. Lieutenant Kinderman from the first film finds himself at the heart of a strange murder case that is tied to religious iconography, the previous slayings of a serial killer long since dead, and a certain patient waiting in the psych ward annals of a disturbing hospital. Some of the best sequels are the ones that find a way to uniquely continue the story without damaging the original's quality or retreading the same plot points into another go-around of expected events. The Exorcist 3 is one of those sequels. Whereas the original was about the church's attempt to defeat a satanic evil that sought to corrupt the innocence of a young girl, the third film focuses on a police lieutenant tired and disillusioned with humanity and faith after a long career of seeing the worst of mankind, made all the worse when he begins his investigation into unholy murders and spends most of his time in the sterile soullessness of a hospital that houses his worst enemy, played by Brad Dourif in one of the most terrifying performances one could ever see.
The Gemini is dead.
No, I am not! I'm alive! I go on! I breathe! Look at me! Look at me! And tell me what you see!
If it didn't have the Exorcist title, this probably would have gone on to be an early 90s cult classic police procedural with a unique sense of terror. Nevertheless, it fits quite well as a direct sequel to the first and offers a more depressing outlook on the battle between good and evil. Best parts of the movie are the performances by George C. Scott and Brad Dourif, the haunting imagery and monologues, and Barry Dvorak's score, which evokes the ominous drones you'd expect from Silent Hill's sound design. The worst parts aren't really present save for a couple of lulls in the pacing. 4.5 out of 5. Children of the Corn. A young couple make their way through the endless roads of Nebraska until they stumble upon a seemingly abandoned town where all the local children have murdered the adults and worship an ancient evil in the cornfield. When adapted to film, Stephen King's work doesn't always hit its mark, and this happens to be the case for his short story turned feature film that some consider a classic of the 80s, but I feel falls flat due to its bland main characters, dated visual effects, and the feeling of untapped potential for a story so genuinely creepy. On the plus side, the teen and child actors do a terrific job at displaying the disturbing effect unquestioned faith and religion can have on young minds. Having the main character spend half of the film endlessly driving through the barren Nebraska highway surrounded by nothing but cornfields is a great visual as well, making you feel truly stranded in what should be a harmless environment. Best parts of the movie are the soundtrack by Jonathan Elias, which uses ominous choirs of children to score the terror, and John Franklin's performance as Isaac, who despite having a small screen time, instantly fills you with fear. Worst parts are the idiotically unassuming protagonists, lackluster effects, and an awkwardly abrupt ending. 2.5 out of 5. The Headhunter. A medieval bounty hunter spends his days hunting mythical creatures that threaten a nearby kingdom, waiting for the day when he takes his vengeance on the monster that killed his daughter. A testament to low-budget filmmaking, the Headhunter's mythical setting, atmosphere, and lead character are the core components to immersing the viewer in this fanciful and dangerous world, choosing to keep the father's epic battles off-screen for a majority of the movie. Some viewers may find this disappointing and cheap, but I honestly found it refreshing to see a more subtle and restrained fantasy tale that eventually descends into a downright disturbing horror tale. The director cites Tales from the Crypt as one of his influences, and it definitely shows in a pulpy and very creepy way. If you're a fan of genre films that prefer simplicity, minimal dialogue, and practical effects, The Headhunter shouldn't disappoint. Best parts of the movie are its droning music, skin-crawling puppetry, and premise. Worst parts are an ending that I personally would have hoped to turn out differently. 4.5 out of 5. The Evil Dead. A group of teens decide to spend the week in an isolated cabin in the woods, only to find themselves attacked by demonic forces that threaten to possess and murder them. Somehow working my way backward through the series with having seen Army of Darkness first, then Evil Dead 2, and finally the first in the series, the roots of the comically disturbing horror franchise definitely established a classic for the time, but pales in comparison to what came after. That's not so much a fault with the movie as it still possesses a creepy atmosphere, disgusting makeup effects, and is an overall fun watch. The bare-bones plot facilitates a night of carnage and blood, but slows down in the third act and doesn't give you enough to deeply care about the characters. Best parts of the movie are its camera work, gruesome makeup and stop-motion effects, and the performances by the lead actresses when they became deadites. Worst parts are some meandering seeds in the third act, and the repetitive nature of the possessions that makes you expect exactly what's going to happen. 3.5 out of 5. Body Bags. A lesser-known horror anthology featuring 3 tales directed by horror masters John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper follow a gas station slasher story, a man desperate for hair growth, and a baseball player whose brand new right eye shows him horrifying visions. Despite having the directing talent of Carpenter and Hooper, as well as featuring an excellent cast that includes David Warner, Mark Hamill, Peter Jason, Wes Craven, and even John Carpenter himself as a Crypt Keeper-esque horror host, the movie unfortunately falls flat for me. The main problem is that the stories just aren't all that interesting, save for the final one where Mark Hamill gives a genuinely terrifying performance. But overall, the stories feel like lesser-known episodes of Tales from the Crypt or The Twilight Zone, creating an anthology that doesn't hold up compared to the style of Creepshow or the comedy of Cat's Eye. This is explained by the fact that the project originally started as a potential TV series, and I can definitely tell the horror veterans were having fun making the film. But the stories, written by Billy Brown and Dan Angel, who would later go on to work on the Goosebumps TV series, which feels more appropriate for their style, weren't strong enough to keep me interested. Best parts of the movie are Mark Hamill's performance and John Carpenter clearly having a fun time playing a wisecracking mortician. Worst parts are the stories and the uneven tone between the 3 of them. 2.5 out of 5. 30 Days of Night. As the town of Barrow, Alaska is consumed by 30 days of night in the winter, a legion of vampires uses the absent sun to their advantage and prey upon the townspeople. A 2007 horror film that always seemed to elude me, the postmodern vampire tale of human survival succeeds in regard to its acting and bloodshed, but leaves you wanting so much more from the strong concept. With the 2-hour film skipping ahead in the story week after week, it makes you wonder what the vampires have been doing for the entire month. Why didn't they just comb house after house until the job was done? If the original comic was adapted as a TV miniseries, not surprising that they eventually made 2 prequel miniseries online, it would have a lot more room to grow for character development, expansion on the vampire colony, and add a better sense of a ticking clock as the humans are picked off one by one. A strong concept, but one that was condensed into an overall solid film. Best parts of the movie are the cinematography, a score that improves as the film progresses, and how the vampires speak their own original language. Worst parts are the to-be-expected story beats and an ending that just didn't sit right, all things considered, regarding the characters. 3.5 out of 5. Poltergeist. A suburban family find themselves at the mercy of terrifying spirits and visions when they discover their house is inhabited by a poltergeist. A classic of the 80s, and rightly so, Poltergeist delivers with mesmerizing visual and practical effects supported by strong performances from every cast member. Despite only being in the movie for 2 scenes, Zelda Rubinstein steals the show as a senior spiritual medium tasked with saving the family's youngest daughter. The only downside would be how the brother and older sister seem to be almost inconsequential to the story and the mixed contrast of genres. Poltergeist is indeed an impressive blend of horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and comedy genres, but at times it feels like it's trying to do too much all at once with its ideas. Best parts of the movie are Zelda Rubinstein's performance, memorable dialogue, and top-notch effects. Worst parts are how Dana and Robbie are written out of an entire portion of the movie, a sometimes unbalanced mix of genres, and the constant inclusion of Star Wars merchandise. 3.5 out of 5. Night of the Demons. A group of teens spend Halloween night partying in an abandoned mortuary, only to be attacked by a demonic force that crashes the party. This has always been a movie that I knew from the cover, but knew nothing else about it. Unfortunately, Night of the Demons is one of the lesser interesting 80s teen horror romps. The first hour of the film establishes the to-be-expected cardboard characters in all their wisecracking and naive glory. Normally, this is made up for with an over-the-top effects-driven climax, and although it's not lacking in that department, I cared so little for the characters that I was underwhelmed by the bloody finale. There's not a whole lot to this movie that makes it stand out from the better teen horror films of the time. Best parts of the movie are its makeup effects and Billy Gallo's performance as Sal. Worst parts are the insipid noodling soundtrack, uninteresting characters, and boring story. 1.5 out of 5. The Mothman Prophecies. Based off the paranormal studies book that chronicled the eyewitness accounts of a creature known as Mothman, the movie follows a widowing reporter who finds himself drawn to the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where he becomes entangled in a paranormal conspiracy revolving around visions and messages of impending tragedy. Never before have I seen an urban legend treated so seriously and adapted into a movie that succeeds in every aspect. What could have easily been a hokey sci-fi mystery turned out to be an outstanding thriller, filled to the brim with engrossing atmosphere, perfect music, and a story held together by the universal themes of faith, loss, and the unknown. And anyone familiar with the history of Mothman will be able to spot some foreshadowing clues for themselves. If director Mark Pellington and writer Richard Hatem were given the opportunity to give the same treatment to Slender Man or any cryptid worthy of a serious adaptation, I think we'd be treated to a whole new caliber of psychological sci-fi drama. Films that actually treat the subject matter with respect and give depth to the story with genuine human fears and surrealism. Best parts of the movie are the gloomy and mysterious aesthetic, Tom and Andy's atmospheric score that evokes the style of Portishead, and solid performances led by Richard Gere and Laura Linney. Worst parts of the film are some awkward scene transitions and the film's weird insistence to constantly have the main character return to his motel room. 5 out of 5. 3 extremes. 3 horror tales from the minds of directors Fruit Chan, Park Chan-wook, and Takashi Miike tell horrendous stories of the desires for beauty, fairness, and forgiveness. Although all 3 films are equally powerful, they can leave an awful taste in your mouth depending on the viewer. Fruit Chan's story, Dumplings, about a retired actress doing anything she can to retain her youth, admittedly left me covering my eyes and squirming to get away. His story is truly unapologetic and not for the faint of heart. Park Chan-wook, though one of my favorite directors, doesn't really hit the mark like I usually expect him to with his story Cut. His camera work is definitely on point, but the story and conflict feel very shallow. I consider Takashi Miike's Box to be the best of the 3, and surprisingly tame considering Miike's previous work. It's a story of haunting regret as a novelist is plagued by the memory of a horrible accident she experienced with her twin sister while working at a circus. The contrast of winter blues and carnival reds is stunning, and Miike's particular focus on silence and precise sounds transports you to a semi-dreamscape within reality. Best parts of the movie are the uniquity between the 3 stories, Miike's use of sound, and Chan-wook's direction. Worst parts are the middle story, which falls flat compared to the other 2, and an ending that doesn't fully deliver for the last story in the movie. 3.5 out of 5. May. A self-conscious and lonely veterinarian experiences first love and heartbreak, culminating in a chilling turn of events that gets more and more disturbing. I don't think I've ever been immensely creeped out within the first 2 minutes of a movie before I watched this. May is both a sad and disturbed tale of a woman clearly detached from the world since she was a child and is naturally crushed when faced with the reality of disappointment and shallow human connection. This unhinged mindset permeates the entire movie as lead actress Angela Bettis keeps you constantly on edge, wondering when and how she's going to snap. It's a story that leaves you utterly uncomfortable throughout the entire film, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Best parts of the movie are its exquisite framing, foreshadowed terror, memorable dialogue, and its theme of the futile pursuit of perfection. Worst parts are slim to none. 5 out of 5. One Cut of the Dead. A Japanese director is desperate to complete his zombie film, more so when his crew becomes attacked by actual zombies. A low-budget independent feature that went on to great success, One Cut of the Dead is certainly impressive for its shot-in-one-take camera work and meta storyline, but I didn't find the overall story and characters that interesting. It's hard to describe the rest of the film without giving away its surprise, but I found it to be very underwhelming, yet still humorous in some scenes. When one of the ideas of the movie is that you're watching something unscripted that is in fact scripted, it makes you question why the concept wasn't portrayed as a live-action stage play where there'd be an audience who would feel like things could go wrong at any time. That goes against the point of making it a one-shot movie, but I still feel like the concept just didn't click with me. Best parts of the movie are the camera work and strong independent aesthetic. Worst parts are a second act that's not as engaging as the first, and subpar acting from a few of the cast. 3 out of 5. Be My Cat, a film for Anne. A Romanian man obsessed with Anne Hathaway decides to make his own movie to convince her to star in the leading role. From beginning to end, you are thoroughly uncomfortable as you watch a socially inept man prey upon unsuspecting actresses in his pursuit of creating a gift for his disturbing obsession. Writer, director, and the main character, Adrian Toffe, doesn't for a second allow the viewer to believe they're watching something fictional by perfectly playing a psychopath that clearly exudes an underlying disconnect from rational human interaction, but comes off as so awkward and seemingly normal that his victims don't suspect anything until it's too late. Some of the improv does begin to tire itself out within the hour-and-a-half runtime, but overall the film is a chilling portrait of untreated psychosis hiding behind a naive shell that somehow exists under everyone's noses. Kudos to the actors for doing such a convincing job that you have to look away out of sheer embarrassment and eventual disgust. Best parts of the movie are the performances and sense of realism. Worst parts are the runtime and some situations that make you question the logic of the victims. 4 out of 5. Imprint. In 19th century Japan, an old journalist travels to a dark and mysterious brothel in search of a prostitute he promised to liberate. Once again, Takashi Miike doesn't disappoint with a horrendous folktale filled with body horror, beautiful colors, and disturbing twists. If the film had decided to stick with its native Japanese dialogue instead of making the actors attempt to speak English, it would have definitely contributed to the atmosphere and make some of the dialogue easier to understand. But apart from that, the story is almost flawless, and once the terror begins, it never lets up. Miike described the story as one that could have been told before the horror genre was around, more like a kaidan. And in this regard, he's absolutely correct, as it's a chilling tale that could easily be told around a campfire, and having it take place during a more ruthless time period, it opens your mind to the possibilities of what horrifying events could have befallen not only those who lived in poverty, but women who were sold into prostitution. Several times the brothel is described as a place not belonging to the human world, making you question whether the horrors we witness are truly capable of occurring in reality, or are only possible in another forsaken realm. Best parts of the movie are the story, Billy Drago's soothing southern drawl, and the performances from the entire cast. Worst parts are some obvious blue screening and the lack of using the Japanese language. 4.5 out of 5. The Dark. An undead girl accidentally stumbles upon a blind kidnapped boy and struggles between caring for another lost soul and keeping her distance as a self-proclaimed monster. The movie's concept had me from the get-go, but proved to be another in a long line of modest-budgeted movies that have a short film idea that needs to be padded to 90 minutes, which is why a scene as simple as a man entering an abandoned house in order to lay down in a bed takes 5 minutes before the story actually progresses. The performances from both of the young actors are well done, but unfortunately, it's hard to sympathize with such tragic characters. Several innocent people die in the process of helping these kids, often by the girl's own hand, which makes it difficult to truly care about the horrors they've been through. I feel the director wanted to portray how unforgiving and unresolved reality can be for children who are victims of circumstance, but it doesn't excuse a body count of people who didn't really deserve it. Best parts of the movie are its concept, actor performances, and lack of score. Worst parts are the paper-thin story, runtime, and emotional disconnect. 2.5 out of 5. 12-Hour Shift. An overworked nurse specializing in black market organ sales endures an insane night shift after her cousin loses thousands of dollars worth of organs. One of the best parts of the movie May was Angela Bettis's lead performance, and I was pleasantly surprised to see her in her latest starring role, which proved to be one of the only highlights of the movie. The premise leads to a lot of dark situational comedy where a domino effect just leads to things getting worse and worse, but the bloody antics are missing engaging dialogue and leaves you wishing for some higher stakes. After a while, the repetitive hospital hallway scenes begin to lose your interest, and some of the more outlandish situations happen without any real explanation. At times, it feels like the script is taking shortcuts and trying to find some way of progressing the story. Additionally, as funny as the dialogue can be, it's missing that extra polish to really make it memorable and engaging. The selfish and snarky characters are there, but they're missing the proper dialogue writer. Best parts of the movie are the actor performances and unique score that blends dance beats with deep cellos and vocals. Worst parts are the lagging story, subpar dialogue, and uninteresting settings. 3 out of 5. Metamorphosis. A Korean family becomes haunted by a demonic force in their new home, and their uncle, a disgraced priest, is their only hope to get rid of it. What feels like a Korean love letter to The Exorcist, unfortunately, is one more retread of every single possession trope and story we've seen before. The acting is well done, but apart from that, everything in the film feels like a beat-for-beat possession plot that tries to make its own identity. One of the ways it tries to do this is by having the demon take the form of one of the family members in order to establish paranoia and doubt. It starts by impersonating the father, who then makes a perverse comment to his youngest daughter. This is a naturally unsettling way of destabilizing a loving family, but this quickly disappears when the demon feels no need to keep its presence a secret and the family quickly figures out what's going on. Even the eventual exorcism scenes, as creepy and well acted as they are, don't offer a whole lot to what we've already seen before, which is a shame considering how unique Korean horror has proven to be. Best parts of the movie are the acting and makeup effects. Worst parts are the familiar and repetitive story and public domain sound effects. 2.5 out of 5. Overall, this was an incredibly fun cinematic journey and a fantastic way of catching up on numerous films that have been on my watch list for much too long. And finally, my top 5 worst movies of the month turned out to be 5. Urban Legend, 4. Night of the Demons, 3. The Town That Dreaded Sundown, 2. Blood Harvest, and 1. Scary Movie 5. And the top 5 best movies of the month are 5. Cube, 4. May, 3. Scare Me, 2. The Exorcist 3, and 1. The Mothman Prophecies. For more film reviews and ratings, follow my Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/separateway, and please share your thoughts on any of the 31 horror movies that I discussed. To all you horror fans, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next Halloween.